Okay, now to the people who are actually important, sitting to my right. Maybe I'll stand over here for a sec. Oh, you all get microphones. Awesome. I'm going to read from cue cards since, sorry, I haven't had time to memorize everything. Reynold Hoskinson is sitting next to me. Reynold is a VP of Technology at Forum. They make intelligent swimwear glasses. And he's been leading the development of AR swim goggles that deliver real-time performance feedback to athletes. He has a PhD in electrical computer engineering from UBC and R&D leadership roles, has held R&D leadership roles at Recon and Brightside Technologies as well. Yeah, he's had a lot of optics-related hardware experience, which I think is actually going to be really interesting to dig into. Sitting next to him is Keith Ippel, with over 25 years guiding impact entrepreneurs. And as the founder of Spring Capital, Keith has helped companies like Hootsuite and Foodie raise over $80 million and trained more than 400 founders on investment readiness. He holds an MBA from Ivy and was named Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year in 2024 for his work widening capital access to underrepresented communities. If anybody knows a better way to do this, come tell me later. I'm still learning. Yeah, okay, fair. What I was doing just before this was trying to feed a hungry wife and a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and there were a few other, anyway. I'm a little too busy. I gotta work on that. Okay, next is Byron Thom. Oh, sorry. My cards were in order of the wrong order. Did I lose one of you? Oh my. I
have a very rare name, so.
Michael, I dropped your card somewhere. Jeebus.
Just get him to do it. Just get him to do it.
Do you want to give it a go? Give it a go.
Great way to test.
My name is Byron. No.
Nice.
And I give money away.
And I'm from Export Development Canada, so I serve as a digital industries lead for the province of BC, here based in Vancouver. I've been with EDC for 11 years, so we are a Crown Corp, similar to BDC and CCC, so there's a whole bunch with acronyms that all sound similar and we all get confused, but nonetheless, happy to be here and happy to kind of share some insight in terms of what we do for technology companies, digital industry companies, and the value proposition that we can bring to Canadian companies to help them go and grow and succeed internationally.
Awesome, thank you. Why am I even doing this? Byron, you're a partner at BDC, and you're leading a $450 million industrial innovation fund. Hopefully I got that right. Where he backs Series A and Series B startups in advanced manufacturing, ag tech, and resource extraction. He's an engineer turned lawyer, and also an IoT founder with Optico Networks. And so he's kind of seen the ecosystem from all different sides. Yeah, and obviously you understand what BDC does now, so also an investor. Great, so now that we've met everyone, I'll set the backdrop for some of the questions, and then we can jump into it. As I mentioned earlier, this is our first time running the HardTech Forum officially, so welcome. And I would say HardTech is becoming cool slowly. 6 years ago, I started at CDL Vancouver. It was just called CDL West or something, I think, at the time. CDL stands for Creative Destruction Labs. I see Liam back there, hey. And I joined as like representative of MistyWest, and there were no hardware companies there. There was like 1 in 20 or something. So it was a little awkward. I was like trying to figure out what a go-to-market strategy is and how all these people are scaling their companies so quickly because they're all software, they're all tech. But I can say that things are changing. And I don't know if you saw the stickers at the front, but Rory and Madison, maybe with the help of ChatGPT and Alice Cooper, made a pretty hilarious sticker. No more Mr. Soft Tech. It's a play on the no more Mr. Nice guy, I guess. So why are people getting interested in atoms all of a sudden? Like, what happened to electrons? Weren't electrons great for a while there? If you build your business in electrons, all you need is like an Amazon subscription or something, and you can do whatever you want. And I think there are a bunch of big trends that are pushing us towards atoms, and I think there's a big role that BC has to play in that context. One of the big ones is global warming, as I'm sure you're all aware. BC is actually a world leader in certain areas, certain clean tech related things. One of the largest carbon sequestration companies comes from nearby us in Squamish, Carbon. They were purchased, though, which will probably be a topic that comes up a few times today. Another thing is friendshoring. I don't know if you've heard of friendshoring, but the idea of basically decoupling from really China. I think the Western world is starting to wake up to some of the concerns there. Even if we believe everything is going to work out well, I think you don't want your economy to have no manufacturing capacity for geostrategic reasons. So the nice way to say that nowadays is apparently friendshoring. And then I think the other one, too, is the software ecosystem. It really exploded, and it's starting to mature a little bit now. And so the number of great investments there is kind of reducing. So investors, entrepreneurs are kind of looking away to new things, areas that are going to explode next. Climate tech would be one of those, but there's also, I think I was reading today that Verity just raised a seed round for like 6 million. I don't know who else. 6.5. So great for that's ag tech, which I don't know if BDC had a hand in that. Vendor. Okay. Well, maybe next time. Yeah, so I mean, but I think there's another thing to say about hard tech, is I'm sure some of you in this room know maybe even better than I do. Hard tech is hard. It's difficult to scale hard tech. You can't just like push a button and get more servers and you're good to go. And so that's part of the reason for the HardTech Forum, is to share notes and figure out what we can do together, and how can we not learn the same mistake 5 different times or things like that. So tonight, we're going to talk about how BC can seize the moment in hard tech, and what we can do together to learn and grow and build some great businesses. And yeah, so that's it. Okay, so I wanted to start my questions right here with Reynald. You played a major role at Forum, at Recon, and also at Brightside Technologies over the course of your career. I don't think most people in this room have probably heard of Brightside. I had not until we talked. But the other thing is that probably most of the people in this room have been impacted by Brightside at some point. Like, you've probably interacted with the technology you guys developed. So I was wondering if you could tell a little bit of the story there and kind of like bring people quickly from, like, what is it? What did you do? What happened? And why is it that people have interacted with it? And I think more importantly, like, are there any lessons learned or things that you think might be done differently today? And then we can jump off from there and see what everyone else has to say.
Yeah, so Brightside was spun out of UBC. Lauren Whitehead, a professor there, had some motivated students who took an idea of his and sort of seized it. And the idea behind it was what now has become high dynamic range displays. So very high contrast, high brightness displays that can display like sort of a larger color gamut and also range of brightnesses compared to normal conventional televisions. So now everybody is claiming their HDR. It's sort of like been interesting to see the trajectory of the hype cycle in that area, but it's sort of stood the test of time in terms of a technology. So I guess the origin of that is the key insight they had back in the day, and this is when like LCD screen, like especially big panel LCD screens were relatively new, is that to get super high brightness, you don't have to get that amount of contrast for every pixel, because the human eye can't perceive a very high contrast in a very small spatial extent. So, like, for instance, when you look up at a street light and in the dark, you see this veiling glare around, and that's due to imperfections in your eye. So, really, as a hardware designer, all you have to do is be at least that good, and then you're fine. Nobody would be able to tell the difference. So, from that, the idea was we the startup basically, and I was doing my PhD at the time. I was an intern, so maybe the word major in terms of my contribution could be debated. But we took LCD screens off the shelf, like bought them from the store, ripped out the backlight, like tore them apart, ripped out the backlight, but very carefully so that it still worked. All those little flex cable like panels were like very hard to deal with, and then replaced it with a big matrix, 2D matrix of LEDs. Super high brightness LEDs, so they burned very hot. So we had to liquid cool them. So the sound was tremendous once we put them back together. It sounded like a big vacuum cleaner, and like FPGAs sort of like all the way around the entire TV to drive these the way that they need to be driven. So yeah, so I guess the combination of the backlight, which was non-uniform, and then compensating for that in the LCD, so you wouldn't display the original image the way that it was sent to you. You would change it by pre-compensating for what you knew the LED light distribution would be. So that was the whole major idea behind it. And yeah, we like were originally selling to just universities and research institutes, like very small volumes, very high prices. Trying to get by with that and some funding from the university. And I guess, what else do you want to know about that?
I mean, I think the story is like that. I think you mentioned when we were talking that that technology ended up being the underlying technology for Sony Bravia. If you've seen that, so like there's tons of TVs out there that are built on that technology. But you guys also got acquired by Dolby when you were pretty small.
Yeah. So as a hardware technology, your expenses are high. Your like income is variable. So the decision was eventually made to get bought by Dolby. So they were primarily interested in the IP. Like this had gone. Even back then, people like other big companies were very. Recognized the value of this IP, so there was a big court case, for instance, and people had to bring out their notebooks in terms of like to prove that they thought of these ideas before, like say Samsung or whoever was suing us thought of it. So once that all got resolved, and Dolby came on and bought it and promised like a big research institute here. Like the founders of the company, Helga Sietzen and Lauren, they wanted a local sort of presence after the fact, and so most of the engineers got put into a big new research lab near like Renfrew Station there in that tech complex, but that only lasted a couple of years. And they, the problem with buying these profit organizations where you're buying the idea, you're buying the projection of that technology into the future. That's what, as a founder, you want somebody to pay more than your immediate revenue. You want them to pay the full value of what you see this company doing in the future. But after that they buy it, then they're looking at the numbers, and so it wasn't an immediate amount of money that came through in terms of the revenue of the company after it got bought, and eventually they got cold feet and closed everything down, moved select engineers down to San Francisco where the Dolby head office was, and sort of closed it there. So it became sort of a bit of a sad ending, but a lot of those people are still in the industry, and it made a lasting effect.
So it's interesting, just to give a little bit of the extended story. So Richard McKellar was the CEO of Brightside. I get to say here in this room, I got a demo from Helga and Richard, and I passed on the investment, and they sold it to Dolby, lucky me. But what was interesting is Richard then went on to become a GP at Chrysalix, which is, for a long time, was actually Canada's largest clean tech venture capital fund here in town. Then went on to launch Kite, which is a venture studio based out of Squamish. Helga actually went on, amongst other things, many things with Helga, but he went on to launch a venture studio that's actually based in Montreal. and actually has had a hand in investing in and funding a lot of really interesting startups in Canada. So sometimes it's like what happens to that individual company is one story, but it is all the story that actually helps to drive this space, right? And so you can see Chrysalis, their footprint all over the clean tech space.
Yeah.
You can see what Helga's doing out of Montreal. So there you go.
Yeah, you keep the people, right? You keep some of the expertise, and I mean that also ties into your story a bit about like Recon and Forum to some extent, which maybe we'll get into. But anything else you want to add, Brian?
I'm not super familiar with the story.
Okay.
So
Okay.
nope.
How would BDC feel about that these days? Would you rather have been the one to buy them for $28 million? Hold on to all that IP, maybe jobs?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Actually, maybe just quickly I guess I wear many different hats. So in addition to being a partner at BDC, I'm also on the board of UBC, which is also part of this story. And I'm vice chair. And so my disclaimer, since we're being recorded, is that I'm speaking in a personal capacity and not on behalf of either organization. So that's the lawyer in me. And then to respond, right, I think coming back to Keith's comment is, like, there's no easy answer in terms of like, hey, one and done, right? When we talk about investing, it's always the multi-time founders that have some of the largest, most interesting kind of outside productive stories, right? And so the one I always speak to is Steve Ufford, right, founder of Trulio, which is a company that my fund invested in. Yeah. And so in his fourth fund, BDC invested sight unseen in a company that had no product, right, because we believed in him, right? He subsequently raised from mostly US investors, and BDC is the only Canadian investor in Trulio. And then during 2021, during COVID, it raised $400 million US from TCV, which is one of the largest Valley-based VCs who invested in Facebook, Airbnb, and a bunch of others, at a $1.75 billion US fund, right? And so, but his first 2 and 3 companies, we're coming back to, were fairly modest. Right, he had built identity-related software companies and had sold them to Experian. I think 2 or 3 of them, right? And then had a new kind of idea within the same space, and then was able to raise gobs of money, and then use that gobs of money to build something that's been like hugely successful. And so I think when we think about overall ecosystems, right, we always talk about how do we do better now, but part of it is how do we build capacity, right? How are we building a system and developing an ecosystem that is going to survive the long term, right? That benefits Canada, but benefits Vancouver, benefits BC, and our families and whoever else that we're both investing in and trying to support.
Yeah, love it. Well said. Michael, anything you want to add, or?
Oh,
okay.
Great story, Bob. Thank you.
Okay. Keith, my next question is for you, and I kind of wanted to contrast Brightside with Hootsuite a little bit, which I think you led some of their early investment in. And Hootsuite took a slightly different path in that they decided to scale here. There was still some US money involved. I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about that? And or I mean, you understand Brightside too. Maybe you could contrast the impact that Hootsuite has had on our wider ecosystem with maybe the impact from Brightside. I don't know if that's too much of an ask, but I think you have some really interesting knowledge in this space, and maybe you can share a bit.
Sure. I think what I love about that is if you talk about capacity building in the ecosystem is made up of many different founders with many different approaches, many different kind of platforms upon which they're trying to do their work. And so Hootsuite, obviously a dramatically different company than Brightside. But so just to play this out, when Ryan and the team were kickstarting it, so just to give everybody some context, speaking of serial entrepreneurs, so Hootsuite was actually the 4th venture that Ryan, David, and Dario founded. And they actually birthed it out of what is now Invoke Digital, if anybody knows Invoke Digital in town. And so, so they actually had client revenue. That client eternally regrets not taking a piece of equity. They paid $75,000 for Hootsuite to be built, and then all the IP remained in Invoke. And so, but what was interesting in that mix is that Ryan always had a vision to build, he always said, I'm going to build $1 billion company in Vancouver, Like that's what he wanted to do. And so when he went out to raise, and this would have been starting in late 2008, you know, he would go down, like it was digital media companies in New York City, Silicon Valley, like that's where he was going. There's no money here for that at the time, no different than hardware really. And so what was interesting is that, you know, all the VCs would be like, look, if I can't drive to your office in 20 minutes, then I'm not investing. And so, but Hootsuite was unicorn-esque in its trajectory, right? It went from 0 to 400,000 customers, I think, in 5 months, 1.6 million in 15 months. These are business customers. This is not like just users. And so it was exponential growth. And so that attracted a lot of US VCs, but then they were resisting and they were like, you got to move to the US, you got to move to the US, you got to move to the US. And so interestingly enough, it was actually Trulioo and Hootsuite, like the two CEOs, they were the ones who put their foot down and said, no, like we're going to do it from here. There's a lot of good reasons why we should do that. And so at the time, at least from my knowledge, the Hootsuite was the first Vancouver domiciled software company, especially digital media, that raised 100% US dollars, but remained Vancouver domiciled. So a Canadian corp with all of the theoretical benefits that come from that. And so what that of course meant is head office is here, hiring hundreds of employees. They actually did a secondary exit in late 2015, which would have been like classic overnight success. So a secondary exit at the time would have been 6.5, almost 7 years. And so, but what that meant is then a lot of people in town then were flush with capacity. You started to see more startups getting fueled. You started to see new funds getting built. And I think that's a part of this building of the ecosystem is to see companies take different pathways, whether it is like a great IP company, sell early, get the capital in, get the team out and into other companies like Recon, which is also an amazing story. And so I think to me, the lesson learned here is like, you have to know your own identity. You have to know who you are as a founder and as a company, and you have to follow your path. Your job is not to copy Brightside or to copy Hootsuite. Your job is to chart your path that is appropriate for your company, but know through the Hootsuites of the world and others that you can actually do it here and resist that like either urge or that temptation or that kind of push to like either go south or go somewhere else and do it that way.
Awesome. Anybody have anything else they want to add? I maybe have a follow-on question.
I think maybe just to compare those two, right? So Hootsuite has generated, right? Hootsuite is somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 million ARR. It employs 800 to 1,000 employees, right? Generates a lot of tax revenue for Canada, BC, right? But you think the money to the founder, so like Ryan, right, has taken secondary money because the company itself hasn't exited 20 plus years later, right? And so if there wasn't that secondary, there would be no capability of then reinvesting that in the ecosystem, right? But because of that secondary, he has League of Innovators and he's been able to do lots of other things through that process. Whereas like you talk about, hey, an early exit, I don't know what Brightside sold for, right? But say $30, $40 million, what was 28 million dollars, right? But quickly. And probably 80-90% of that went to the founders because they had only raised a tiny little bit of money. Yeah. It might be the similar amount of money that's actually come out of those two companies, in one in a very quick sale and one in a secondary, because now all of the equity in Hootsuite is still tied up, right? And the company is at scale, but who knows when it's ever going to exit. Yeah. And so, like the actual takeaway is like absent the fact that like giant tax revenues for Hootsuite. But like the actual money to founders might actually be exactly the same.
I agree.
And so, like, there's not necessarily one versus the other, right? And if I can get $28 million in my jeans in 2 years versus wait 20 and still get $28 million, the IRR is a very different math, right? And so I think like the struggle is like when we look and when people, right, policymakers, like, and I work for a group that has a strong policy team, right? But when policymakers think about this, like you have to also remember there's individuals who are making decisions that are best for their company, but best for their families, right? And it's a really difficult decision, and it's a hard decision that Ryan made to say, hey, I'm not going to take someone who's willing to pay more, but I'm going to take someone who's willing to believe in me and allow me to keep my business running here in Vancouver, right? And like, good on him, right? And like, that's his personality and the values that he has, and he's, and we want those types of folks, right? But that's not an easy thing that you're always going to be able to find.
If anybody's looking to invest in next-gen founders, Bright, sharp, lots of hustle. You can see it. It's great.
Michael, I wanted to get you in here too. Obviously, if they sell at, like, it's HardTech and they follow those two different paths, one of them could have, you know, the possibility for exports, and the other one might not.
Absolutely.
One of them is basically just handing over that intangible IP.
Yeah, I mean, on the IP side, not so much, but let's say like for a service rendered receivable, we often can come to the table to help de-risk a lot of that so that the business can diversify a lot of its concentration risk. So we often see companies grow, they scale, they do very well, and then they look beyond our borders in terms of finding opportunities to ultimately increase that sandbox. And I mean, from a risk standpoint, everybody wants insurance when the house, you know, home insurance when the roof's already on fire. But it's the proactive players within the game that, if they can look at the TAM and they can understand the macroeconomic data as to how they want to scale and where they want to grow, it can be leveraged as a great resource where they actually build in the pricing of, say, a trade receivable insurance into their invoicing. It doesn't eat too much of their gross margins, and they protect themselves immensely to continue that growth.
I'm not sure I understood that last sentence, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's more so in terms of just protecting your bottom line, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think the other thing, if I speak about EDC in particular, like I think what a lot of founders don't know in Canada is sometimes there is this inflection point where if you start to sell abroad, suddenly you can go from like a pilot or a proof of concept, and then people are ordering in volume.
Hockey stick.
And sometimes that's the part that can catch you. That's actually why, like, for all of you who are going to market with HardTech, is you actually want to start talking to Michael and EDC now. Right? Even if you're not selling abroad, because if the plan is to sell abroad, you want to get to know them, you want to get to know where they start to come into play, and you want them to get to know you so that when you pick up the phone and you're like, I just had an order for 10,000 units or 100,000 or 1,000, like whatever's appropriate for your scale, then you can actually get that conversation rolling. Because when you have that type of financing, then it's suddenly you can say yes to those deals, as opposed to saying, wow, I don't have the capacity yet.
Yeah. You can be more proactive with
Yeah,
those
yeah,
conversations as opposed to reactive and then trying to scramble to find the operating capital to fulfill it. Yeah.
Well said.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. There's one other topic I want to just inject here, but one idea I've heard floating around is and I guess there's like harder, better, faster, stronger. How do we win? Is that too much to ask? Like, I guess another way to say it is like, you need capital, you need experienced entrepreneurs. How do you retain those things? Like, how do you, I mean, Elon went to what, like Queens or something? But he wasn't going to build SpaceX in Toronto, probably, or whatever it is. I guess PayPal.
I think they threw him out.
They threw him out.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
Well, he's gone through some changes. I don't know if anybody wants to take that.
I was sharing a story earlier. So I give a lot of talks, and so I often start a talk with like, hey, if I was an American, I'd say, hi, my name is Keith, but I'm Canadian, so I say, sorry, my name is Keith, right? And so your comment about how do we do it like bigger, faster, like how do we win? Like there's a part of that where like I saw half the people in this room start to fidget because like we're quintessentially Canadian, and like to say that we want to win sometimes is not us. But we should, and we can. Like, you know, Recon was a successful exit to Intel. We've seen a lot of great success stories and emerge from at least this local ecosystem, which I think is really powerful. I think, to your comment, you know, I think we need to have incredible talent. We, at least locally, we have some amazing talent, like UBC, SFU, within the HardTech world. We actually have some great people coming out of BCIT. Like, you know, there's great talent locally, which is point number one. Point number two is actually, yes, we do need capital. Now, I think for a lot of, how many people here think there's not enough capital in town? Okay, so fun fact, it's not true. So there's this interesting thing, which is the funding, this marketplace of like raising funding is the most inefficient marketplace in the world. And the reason is because all of us as founders, like if somebody looks like they're wealthy, we'll ask them to write a check. Whether or not they invest in our space, our sector, our stage, doesn't matter. We're like, hey, let me pitch you, right? Because you never know. And then the tricky part with investors is, even though investors often say they have a thesis, they're all afraid to miss the next Facebook. I will tell you, I sat across from Stuart Butterfield and said no. Right? So you remember these things, right? Like I sat across from Ryan and said, yes, different story. Like, you win, you lose, But the point is nobody wants to miss those deals. So they'll, they're like, no. Like, it's very rare for investors to be like, this is all I look at, I will not talk to you. They'll be like, sure, let's grab a coffee. That makes a very inefficient marketplace, but there's a tremendous amount of capital in this town. But I think we need to get the capital to work a little bit more together, I think, which is really important. Because I think if we can get the capital to flow a little bit more easily here, across provincial borders, across global borders, I think we can start to see more momentum. Let's leverage the talent, let's keep it here. I think BDC and EDC, to me, are probably two of the most underrated resources in the Canadian ecosystem. Like, very few people know how many funds BDC has across different sectors, across different stages, silos, right? So I think that's really important. So these are some of the things that I think we need to leverage in order to continue to help this ecosystem win. I'll start there.
Okay, great. Well said. I want to make a joke about not buying my 5th house, but I don't own 4 houses. So maybe next time I stumble into $1 million, I'll invest it in a startup. No, well said. And I also loved your point about talent. That's one thing I've heard as well, I think. And that might be an interesting thing to...
Well, it's technical talent, right? I think this is well known and understood across Canada, is that we have amazing research institutions. We have the most educated population of almost any country in the world, based on college and university graduation rates. But we don't have executive leadership talent, and we don't have sales talent to the same way that there is in the US specifically. And so when we're typically selling into the US, and we don't have that same motion, right? Acceleration of revenue is a bigger struggle for Canadian technology companies than it is in the US. And that's something that is fixed, not easily, but over time, right? And so I think a lot of people, from a policymaker perspective, and I'm not a policymaker, but from the conversations I've had, it's around having anchor companies, so large companies that are spewing off like senior leadership executives who can then have both, one, the financial capabilities, but two, also the talent and the expertise to go into technology companies and help them scale, right, within their kind of specific skill set. And also enough of those types of companies that we can attract the best around the world. And so having clusters of types of companies where, right, climate tech or mining tech is really big in BC. If we have enough of them, we can then attract senior C-suite talent or senior sales talent for those types of companies to come to Vancouver, right? And then if it doesn't work at that specific company, there's still another 2, 3, 4, 10 companies that they can go work for, right? That's part of the draw of going to San Francisco, is like if you land and you spend 2 years at Microsoft or Alphabet, right? You immediately have 50 other opportunities because of proximity and network there. And so like those clusters of organizations make an ecosystem just function much more quickly, right? And pace is a huge indicator of success, but also just more efficiently, right? And so I think part of it is like we got to be patient, and in today's world, no one is patient. But like we need kind of those large companies to come scale, exits to happen, and then for that to circulate. I think on the flip side, the struggle is that, and I know EDC and BDC in some situations are actually supporting this, right, into my chagrin sometimes. But Vancouver specifically is often kind of has a bit of a plant mentality where we have large development offices for large multinational technology companies, right? So just down the road in almost any direction, there's, right, a hyperscaler that has a few thousand people. Leveraging Canadian talent that is kind of a third off what they would pay, or sometimes 50% off what they would pay in the Valley. But that salary that they're making is still probably 2 or 2.5 times more that a Canadian company would pay them. And so when you have this huge pool of capital, of talent capital, right, that is held up within these large hyperscalers, like that's also difficult for us. And so in some cases, we think that's a great thing because they're training to like at some of the largest companies in the world and eventually will leave because they'll get burnt out there and want to go do something more entrepreneurial, right? But that itself still takes a bunch of time. Right? And so, like, I don't know what the answer is, but like, there's all of these different things that are either both helping, but also hindering the ability for us to kind of build a functioning, right, super efficient ecosystem.
Really interesting. So what we need are more tech layoffs.
That was a big thing. Actually, like in 2008, right, you think about all of this huge wave of technology that came out in 2010 to 2012, like the Ubers, the Airbnbs, were all due to layoffs in the Great Recession, right? And so, like, I'm not promoting that, but like in crisis, right, if you don't have a job, you start a company yourself.
Yeah. But I mean, there is another thing about the hyperscalers, right? They're software companies, right? So if we're talking about hard tech here, maybe there's less of a comparative advantage or differential between here and there. I don't know if that's something that is worth digging into, or maybe it's like a little bit earlier, so to speak, in some of these areas, like clean tech. Who's the world's leader in clean tech? Like I don't know if I could name that right now.
I'd be curious of the crowd's reaction for sure. Like it's interesting when you think back to like some of the real giants in software like Microsoft and Apple and others, and so Apple of course had hardware pretty early on, but like a lot of companies now, Google, they're all in hardware, and so on one hand you have a lot of the software players who have said no, we need to be more kind of platform in our approach. I think in the last 5 years anyways, I think a lot more investors have at least become aware of and or comfortable with hardware. In our particular world, which is impact plus tech, it's been very interesting to, like, it's the COVID effect. Like we've seen so many more investors get involved in health tech coming out of COVID, so many more investors get involved in clean tech coming out of COVID, but that's also meant that they've had to start to understand and embrace hardware as a part of it. I think the final piece that I would say is we are seeing a lot more scenarios now where people are able to come up with low CapEx approaches to go to market for hardware that's actually making the capital flow a lot more, getting people more comfortable and creating these notions of maybe we can have more hardware-esque hyperscale businesses. So not saying that that's like mainstream now, but I think there's a lot of signals that's actually opening the door and the potential for this. So to give everybody some context, because this is data that we track at Spring, in 2017, 2% of the investors in our database would do hardware deals. Last year, 24%. So that's a massive shift. It's still sub 51, but that's a big swing. And we're at the pre-seed stage, pre-seed and seed, so it's still early days, but like a lot more people are like, hey, we're getting into this, and they're seeing different ways to do it.
Okay, really interesting. And maybe this is a chance to go to Michael and talk a little bit about the role that EDC can play in terms of helping companies scale hardware, or even if you could explain a little bit more about kind of where you fit at like the big picture scale.
Yeah.
I have to admit, when we were talking about it, it was really interesting.
No problem.
Yeah, and I mean, like, how are you guys the cooler Crown Corporation that we talked about, right? Because
think-
I know you did mention that on the
I
call.
said we are a cooler Crown Corp. I'll hold my hat on that subjectively and individually, not on behalf of EDC. But it's hard not to feel cool. Like, I mean, we've been if you look at COVID, I mean, some of the major events that have taken place, similar to BDC, we kind of came to the table, right? We helped a lot of businesses where a lot of private investment just kind of dried up. We helped a lot of businesses where their supply chain shrank, their sales shriveled, and we came to the table in different ways to mitigate risk and to help bolster down on businesses that had good models, and it was really a force majeure impact that changed how they operate. And I think that's cool personally, to be able to pivot and to be agile, to find ways to come to the table. But we are a bit of an enigma, and that's what I had prefaced to Taylor. It's like people think of EDC and they think of a canoe commercial, or they see a Cirque du Soleil commercial during the Grey Cup, and I give it to our marketing team. I mean, it's innovative, but we wear many hats, similar to BDC. And if people do think they know about EDC, they're like, oh yeah, you're an insurance company. It's like, we do insurance, yeah, but we're not an insurance company. I mean, we're driven based on GDP. So the more you succeed, the better we do as a country. And it really depends on the inflection point of the business. So to your point, I mean, there are multiple crown corps, right? You have CCC, BDC, EDC, you have provincial players like Pacifican, Trade and Invest BC, you have all of these different constituents. In clean tech, you have STDC, you have, CIB, sorry?
Just to have that.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, fair enough, yeah.
But you have an NRC IRAP.
Yeah, NRC IRAP, I
MyTax.
said, right? So there's all these players, and they all play a pivotal role depending on where you're at in your cycle. Where EDC comes in, it's a bit later stage. So the products need to be commercialized. It can be a service rendered. It can be other. But it really depends on the inflection point of the business. So if a company is looking to go abroad, to Keith's point, well then sure, let's see, as a general practitioner, what's the ailment that you're facing and how can we mitigate that risk? Our job is to be a risk tool to you, either to mitigate the performance risk of your business or to mitigate the counterparties of who you're selling to. Where we see the strike zone primarily for EDC is a commercialized business and they're going abroad. So they've done that scale up, they've grown within Canada, they have a customer base, and now, to Keith's point, they're no longer wanting to be reactive to sales outside of Canada. They're wanting more support from a fairly restrictive Schedule A banking system where there's a reluctance to lend because of jurisdictional risk and things like that. And we come to the table to ultimately serve as a catalyst to get through those points, those pain points. If you're a pre-commercial business and you're looking at EDC for support for growth, it might not necessarily be something that we can directly help with within our core programming, but you have access to the entire global trade ecosystem through EDC, no different than BDC, right? So we look at businesses from a holistic lens. It's like, okay, well, where are you at in your journey? And what is it that you need? And then from there, we troubleshoot. So we're not out selling vacuums to you and here's a widget and take it and then, or not our department, sorry, we can't help you. But that's really where we come to the table. And most people think, okay, yeah, I think I have an understanding of you, but then they have an aha moment. They're like, okay, yeah, so you do more than just trade credit insurance. You actually can help me acquire more non-dilutive capital. You can actually help me with dilutive capital through a matching program with equities. You can co-invest with BDC and other players, depending on if there's an undersubscribed term sheet at the table. You have the ability to help us mitigate FX risk if we're going somewhere else and our supply chain is hammering us on our gross margin. On an off-balance sheet basis, we support trade finance tools, right? Maybe it's standby letters of credit, depending on who you're selling to and how it operates. I often see in HardTech spaces, I think Keith nailed it on the head. Companies get a large sale and it's beyond their capacity. And they're like, we have to actually say no to this because we don't have the operating capital to do anything to fulfill this. And if we go to our bank, the bank will often say, well, you better go and finish your next fiscal year, and if the numbers are good, then I'll lend you a little bit more money. And I don't really see a lot of value in the security. So we often come to the table and say, okay, well, why don't we bridge that gap? Who's your bank? Maybe there's something that we can do as a self-sustaining Crown Corp to bolster the bank, to help you with the money to then fulfill that order, and then you create that GDP. And that is the growth mindset of EDC.
Awesome, really interesting. And I guess maybe one thing to double click on briefly, because I see what you're talking about and what Byron is talking about. There's almost like a gap there potentially, right? Because for companies to really get engaged with you, they need to have solved sales. And and I've seen that problem with many of the companies we work with. There's really bright technical people with really bright ideas, but no sales training. And if the answer to that is have some more anchor companies in Vancouver, that seems challenging. I'm wondering, is there another way to get there? And maybe this is where I could ask you a question, Keith, because you have played a mentorship role with a lot of entrepreneurs. Like, how can we shortcut that process, short of another round of huge tech layoffs or something else, like or building an anchor company in Vancouver?
Well, I'm sure I'm not the only one on this panel who has opinions about this. I think there's a few things. How many people here are entrepreneurs? Cool. How many people here love to sell? Did not expect that. I was expecting one hand. I think first things first, I think one is to actually share the stories of like how you have come to love selling. Like for some of you, it's innate, but chances are for most of you, you've learned to fall in love with selling because it helps you to do what you do. It helps you to raise money. It helps you to grow your business, et cetera. And so one is we need to storytell. The second one is there's actually a phenomenal amount of training and capacity building that is available in Vancouver, in BC, for people to learn how to sell. So there's, if you guys want just one of many examples, there's an organization in town called Sales Primer. Colin and Chris run it. They do training programs. They have mentoring. They have advisory services. They work with a lot of accelerators. They've helped a lot of companies to kind of figure out like how the heck to get there, like how to sell the first widget, how to sell the 10th, how to sell the 100th. So I think these are the types of things that I think are really important. I think the other thing is that a lot of people raise capital, sometimes non-dilutive, sometimes dilutive. I think we, as an ecosystem of capital, we need to do a better job of sharing who we funded and doing more wraparound kind of post-round support and helping people through it. So one example I'll give everybody, there's a company that I work with right now. They're in our fund portfolio. It's called Retina Logic. Sorry, it's in Alberta, not here, but cool company. And so they are a company that has democratized access to eye care by building a software platform that actually allows eye exams and other eye care to be delivered through AR and VR headsets. So it's a hardware software play, very interesting, cool IP. But the CEO is like, he's a tech guy, and he's like, how do I sell? And so to give everybody some inspiration, so he started selling. He sold his first headset at the end of February 2024. So he'll do 1.8 million in revenue in 12 months. And he's non-technical, no sales background whatsoever, but like collectively a group of us kind of got some training for him and a couple of his team members, then some mentorship and support. So I think we need to be holistic. There was a couple of VCs, an angel group that came together to help him do that. And we had to agree to work together to help him do that. So I think that's important, is that type of collaboration. Synergies, I think was the word. Yeah.
And so if you have a hardware startup and you need help selling it, I hear Keith has a lot of free time.
Yeah. And I think there's different stages, right? When we're talking about growth of startups, like how I see it is like at kind of like the first idea stage, right? Getting to your first million is a certain hurdle. Getting to your 5 million is a certain hurdle. 10 million is a certain hurdle. Getting to 100 million is a whole different hurdle. And so really where I'm saying like the biggest gap is to have these huge companies is really at the senior level, 10 million plus, right? So I think there are so many activities and so many resources for young founders to go get and do customer discovery. Go get your first 5, 10 customers. You're wearing a shirt from one. CDL's great, right? Spring runs like these types of programs. A lot of the different acceleration programs do. Right, New Ventures BC has a whole program right now that's ongoing. It's a great program that's run once a year that has like just a course that has helped tons of companies kind of get their first million in sales. But the real struggle is like, okay, you can go like a single person, a single founder can go get $2 million of revenue, maybe 5, maybe 10, right? But now how do I go build the infrastructure to be able to go scale to 100 million? And then to 1 billion, right? Because hardware, you can get to that level relatively quickly, right? With funding through EDC. But like, what are the processes? What are the partnerships? What are the go-to-market motions to be able to allow you to build pipeline to ramp at that level? There's not a lot of that in Canada, was my comment. I think getting to the first 10 is amazing, right? And this is the struggle between ambition, right? And like trying to hit a home run is like, just from a statistics perspective, like how many companies in Canada, right, have hit $1 billion in revenue? There's not a lot, right? But there is the ambition for it, right? And so how do we match the ambition, right, with the skill sets and the capability, the funding and the capital to be able to go and get there? Like that's the hard part, right? And like very few ecosystems. Like you have to remember, we look at the US every day, all day, right? But most of the other technology ecosystems are also struggling and also looking to the US and be like, how do we do that? Right? And so there are certain things in Canada that we do really well, right? And then we look at the US and we're like, oh, we're the little kid next to a big brother. And so that's the struggle. It's because like we're always seeing someone who has these crazy ramps and we're wondering why we can't get the same sometimes.
Yeah, well said. I've seen this at some of our the companies we work with. Like post Series A, they'll have more senior leadership positions appear in the company, and often those will be filled by people from the U.S. who fly in 2 or 3 days a week to be a VP of whatever, because they can't find that talent here. So just interesting to hear you say it that way.
And has that worked out for them?
Always some.
Yeah, I mean, I think it remains to be seen in some cases, and definitely in some cases, no. And in some cases, they have forced them to move up, which was interesting. And like, I kind of see that as a positive, if I'm honest.
And oftentimes, like, people will open up sales offices in the geographies, like, right? As much as we say, sell in Canada first and then go to the U.S., most companies I know and I'm investing in are U.S. first, and then maybe Canada second or third sometimes.
Yeah, we're U.S. first for sure. It's like maybe 2/3, and we had a bunch of Canadian marketing executives, and then settled on an American one, just because the rationale was, since that's our biggest market and the expertise in our particular niches is there, then it was natural, especially post-COVID when people can do remote stuff. It seemed like a natural fit to get somebody who knew our exact problem. So it can, and it's been kind of successful for us so far. So those sort of, especially in marketing and sales, like those there is a lot of expertise out there, and the more that you can get, the better it is for you.
How are you doing for time, Madison? Is it Q&A time or?
Can I pass your mic around?
Sure, yeah.
So we're going to do audience Q&A. We have time for about 2 to 3 questions. This is the first hand up.
Thank you very much for your insight. I have a very simple question. How do you ramp up hardware products in Canada if we don't have the manufacturing capability locally?
Well, the simple one is not to manufacture here, to do all the design. I think there's a lot that can be done locally, and then you offshore when you need to, as long as you have a very tight relationship with those suppliers and you've really thought that through, that chain. It doesn't, there's various levels that you can do, right? You can just go to some contract manufacturer and say, okay, here's my problem, do all the work, but then they'll take a lot of the margin as well. So you can sort of, like we did, is go down one tier where you're picking all the different sub-suppliers and you're asking them to sort of manage each other. Some of them are higher up in the hierarchy and some are lower down, and you have to take a much more like sort of active role in it, but that can also work in terms of maintaining your margins and the control over your design as a hardware manufacturer, and still work offshore.
I wanted to add one quick thing for Byron, which is your $450 million is for like industrial tech. And one thing we see working on like a more industrial commercial side is lower volumes and like B2B hardware plays tend to be able to accommodate manufacturing here versus consumer, which is what Forum is, which is very hard to do here.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So our first fund was a $250 million fund, 21 companies. About 50% of those companies had a hardware component. Everything had some software, but 50% software only, 50% hardware software. And I think, well, like for example, one of them is a BC company, Forage, right? So they build robots for mushroom farming, and they're producing mostly in BC. Right, so their production is in Salmon Arm, ramping for the first few customers, right? And so these are very expensive, full robot platforms that are sold to mushroom farmers. And to your point, right, for the first 10, 50, 100 customers, they'll build it themselves, right? Because it's B2B, high margin, very expensive, and they want to be able to control quality. But eventually they'll figure out how to build larger manufacturing, but they have the time because they're on the B2B side to be able to do so. Similarly, I'm on a board as an observer of a drone company in Hamilton, and they do their own manufacturing as well, like in-house within theirs, because similarly, it's like tens of thousands of dollars. They buy the components, right, from different suppliers, and there are long lead time components that may be difficult for them to build themselves, but they're still doing a lot of the manufacturing and all of the assembly. And so we do see that a lot. And then from a prototyping perspective, like having access to tooling is such an important aspect, and Canada is great for that, right? And so I think that all of the different research universities have abilities. There's makers labs everywhere, right? There's like production companies like MistyWest that have the ability to be
We
able to
do
do
bridge
those things.
manufacturing. If you want to borrow a soldering station, don't tell Mira I sent you. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Okay. Behind me. Okay.
Thank you. This is a question for Keith, because I think he brought up this fact that there are more hardware ventures now because they're able to enter with lower CapEx. I found that interesting, and I missed how they're able to pull that off. Are there some good examples of startups that were able to get off the ground in hardware with lower CapEx? How do they do it?
So I think there's different examples. One example out of Victoria is Open Ocean Robotics, solar-powered drone boat company. And in their particular case, part of the reason they do it is, again, B2B, B2G. So they're generally doing it in smaller volumes at a time. And then the second thing is the way they sell is they sell as made to order. So for them, it's actually been, so for them, therefore, like in terms of inventory carry, in terms of, the overall scale of production, at least at the stage that they're at now, they've been able to keep the CapEx quite low. We've actually seen some interesting companies in the ag tech space around vertical farming and circular economy ag tech, where they've actually been able to develop their processes and their manufacturing processes such that they can actually, instead of building mega plants, they're actually building in situ capability. So this notion of like a nationally or globally connected set of like hyper-local nodes. And in doing so, they don't have to build $20 million plants or $30 million plants. They can actually, do it like in each location. Interestingly enough, if you guys are curious, Chop Value, which upcycles chopsticks and turns it into furniture and homeware, they were actually one of the first companies to actually show that that can be done at scales. Now 22 or 23 cities around the world. And they actually just do all of that manufacturing locally, and they've built an entire system and process around that, including supply chain. And I think they've worked with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that we look at the supply chain in terms of like indirect export, right? So if a company is integral, so I'll use the example of like MindSense. They're a bit bigger, right? They had a hardware technology, and their first large contract was with tech, right? Yeah. And it was for a mine, but the product being mined wasn't staying in Canada. So we saw them as an integral part of the supply chain to create exports, and thus was able to come to the table to then help them with one of these first large contracts where they outfitted the construction equipment with it's really cool like geophysical technology. And then afterwards, they're like, oh, okay, well now we can use you for what we conventionally thought you could be used for. So we've set our sights for Chile in terms of mining. But a lot of people don't realize like that even if it's a domestic transaction, business to business, there's a you have to ask the questions, right? You don't know what you don't know. And as long as we can tie it to a larger export platform, so you think of BC, you have, 7 captains of industry, oil and gas, timber, infrastructure, and ICT, aquaculture, agriculture, they're all applicable. Yeah.
Great. Got any other questions?
This might be too deep, but in the fall, when Justin Trudeau was flailing around, he came up with an announcement about the SHRED program, which was kind of just disappeared into the noise. But one of the things that they were proposing was adding capital back into the SHRED program, increasing the expenditure limits because they haven't changed them for 20 years. And most interesting was the definition of an eligible Canadian pubco, which would be eligible for refundable SR&ED credits. And so we're waiting to see, they're a minority government, pardon me, right now. So we're waiting to see if some of that will come through. But from my perspective, that should help clean tech companies and biotech companies who run out of friends and family money. Because I've met a few public, like med tech public cos, that they went public so they get funding from the States. And they're just 10 years later, they're still trying to find funding. So I'm curious if any of you guys have heard about that, have any news on that, or if you think that would be an interesting development for hardware companies.
It's a great question. So a couple of things that I would say here first is anything like SR&ED or IRAP, first entrepreneurs need to view that as being catalytic money and not as keep the lights on money. I think that's one of the great opportunities, but also one of the great challenges in Canada is, like, I was just speaking about this with somebody the other day. Like, I know somebody who's been running a startup for 17 and a half years off the back of SR&ED and MyTax and IRAP and meaningfully haven't made $1. And so 1 out of a million, right? Like, so there's always that risk. The second thing, though, is I think there's always an opportunity for the Canadian government to look at how to assess things like SR&ED, MyTax, IRAP. Like, all of these programs can be catalytic, but fundamentally, IRAP really hasn't changed in 25 years. SR&ED really hasn't changed in 25 years. Like, these things. So there is an opportunity to kind of take a look at what's happening in the ecosystem and think about, like, are there ways to, like, bring innovation into that space? And so personally, I think yes. I have not heard of any news related to SR&ED since the government change, or at least clarity. And so always possible. Personally, I think we benefit from those programs. I think there's room for innovation. I think the government has to resist some of the trends that exist out there and say, actually, like, immigration of high quality talent is super important for the innovation sector, and so let's get over it. But we can all talk about that later. So.
Okay, and we still have time for at least one more question. Oh, they already went. Is there anybody else?
You've been banned.
If there isn't anybody else, okay. 1 second.
Yeah, this is completely different area from what I asked before. Do you have advice for companies to make use of tax havens, just like Bermuda Islands or something like that? I know that there was a set of rules that were basically allowed by the Canada to engage with this kind of places in terms of how you run your business.
Mike, you want to take that one?
I'm just going to make the comment from the capital stack, at least from our perspective, both at, like, because we have an angel network and we have an early stage venture capital fund that works at the pre-seed and seed stage. So one thing that I would encourage here is, like, there's a lot of ways to grow a business, right? And so sometimes you grow it through revenue, sometimes you grow it through tax credits, sometimes acquisition. There's a lot of ways to do it. What I would say is, if you're going to raise money from investors, like angel investors, angel groups, venture capital funds, like the BDCs of the world, I agree, disagree. But, like, we tend to, like, when we meet an entrepreneur, we expect things to look a certain way. A certain type of incorporation status, a certain type of cap table, a certain type of paperwork. And so can you get exotic with tax havens, et cetera? Absolutely. There's all kinds of ways that you can do that. If you get super exotic like that and then you come to a VC fund, they'll be like, that's off standard. And VCs and angels they're just a microcosm of humanity. And if there's one thing we know about humanity is change bad, right? And so when you go to a VC and you don't look like everything else, sometimes we're like, why? So why did you do that? And it starts to introduce questions you don't want. But that's only under the premise that you want you believe your venture scale and you want VC money. If you're gonna bootstrap it or, like, seed strap it or whatever, like, cool, like, go do that. But so the question is not can you do it, the question is should you do it relative to what your goals and outcomes are? And I would say this to everybody, like, should you look at venture capital? Maybe yes, for a lot of you, probably not. Like, that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, like, look at these different things and say, is it right for me? Yeah, you bet.
Second.
I guess I'm interested in hearing a little more about the challenges of keeping companies here and the draw to move to the States to relocate. And I hope I can phrase this kind of usefully, but I guess Keith made the point that there's quite a bit of opportunity, there's quite a bit of capital here, and that maybe it's inefficient to match capital to founders. But it still seems like a lot of people have that draw to move to the States or move to the Valley as tech companies. Are there other reasons that are driving that? I guess we also mentioned like lack of talent in sales, especially. But like, is that the complete picture? Are we?
I think there's lots of reasons. I tell every company, go spend time in San Francisco. Like, I think it's important for everyone to understand, right, why San Francisco is the way it is, right? And I personally am not a fan of the city of San Francisco because, like, they've made decisions that have been amazing for tech, right, but have not been amazing for other aspects of their community. And so maybe I'll pause there because I don't want to say things that may get me into trouble. But the comment is, like, there are great things about San Francisco, mostly around pace, about ambition, right? You can go to a coffee shop and you'll literally meet 10 different founders working on something very cool, or sometimes all the same thing. Like, I remember when I first started in venture in 2016, the story, and I told this story probably for like 4 years, like, I spent a week in San Francisco and I probably met 20 companies, I kid you not, 20 companies that were trying to build the next Evernote. And like, Evernote's barely a thing still, but like, I was like, why, like, Evernote's already great, why do we need a better Evernote? And Evernote. Because everyone, yeah, right. because like, that's kind of like the mentality of San Francisco as well, because like, there's so much of this cycle that happens, right? And definitely there's a certain people that are attracted there that are trying to build things and they're just trying to replicate the things that they've seen. But what's great about that is, like, the ambition, the access to capital, the pattern matching is faster than anywhere you'll ever meet. Sorry, anywhere you'll ever go. But like, the diversity of thought and the ideas, right? The Canadian value system, right? The problems that we see, the way we look at the world, the way we try to address problems, are like, is of a superpower that, like, we have both in Vancouver and anywhere around the world. San Francisco has as well, right? And so, like, being able to build companies in the way that's unique to your value proposition, right, to your value system, will allow you to have something unique that will allow you to scale, right? And sometimes you will need to go spend time in San Francisco, but I'm not a believer that you'll need to actually move a company there. And I think, like, from an investor and from a capital perspective, like, I think YC requires you now to incorporate in Delaware, right? But there's no expectations that you're still moving. Like, rarely now do I get that aspect, but I do know, like, that's still always a conversation.
Can I just add one thing there? YC has an interesting YouTube channel. So if you want to not go to San Francisco, but get some of San Francisco, you can just go look at their YouTube channel.
Does anybody not know what YC stands for? Anybody not know what YC stands for? Y Combinator. Y Combinator was really the first of the modern accelerators, probably the biggest brand, like the Harvard of accelerators. They actually helped to create the first safe note. For those who want to nerd out on something else, safe agreement. But, you know, they're global leader and their YouTube channel is killer.
And it's a huge accelerant, right? Like, if you apply to YC and you get in, go.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, like, yeah.
I'll maybe add a little bit that from, like, the technology side. So as a, you know, if you come out of university and you have something you're super specialized in something, then Vancouver is very small for that particular discipline. But then you can go down to San Francisco and there'll be like 10 companies that you could potentially get hired for. So it's challenging to develop ecosystems that involve very specialized hardware technology, because, yeah, you have to have people that are self-confident enough that they can, you know, work at the one company in town that does that, and then maybe that company will succeed, and then that seeds other companies, and that becomes its own little ecosystem, like, say, quantum computing or something like that. it was like one company announced like, how many of her companies in Vancouver, even though that's such an exoteric thing that literally the only place you could get hired was probably San Francisco. So I think that's a challenge of bootstrapping like very technical hardware, is that the pool of engineers that you're trying to hire if you're starting a company like that, they really have to take a leap of faith to stay here versus go where not only they have like some interesting job there, but they have job security in the fact that if they get laid off because the company doesn't work, they can go somewhere else like without having to uproot their life.
Mm-hmm. I think just a couple of quick things. So sometimes I think when we look at and we've been picking on or emphasizing San Francisco specifically, but sometimes as an entrepreneur, ease of access to capital and total volume of capital, total volume of talent and like specific types of talent, quantity and quality of job opportunities, which is what was just raised, pay, right? Like these are things that I think cause people to be drawn to ecosystems. A couple things that I would note here, though, is if any of you are thinking about like, how do I grow my business? Like, of course, I'm going to advocate that you keep your headquarters here for a bunch of reasons. But if you want to grow your business, like, if you're thinking climate tech, you need to start to now look at Singapore. If you're looking at blue economy, hard tech, you need to be looking at Oslo. Right? Like if you start to think about some different sectors now, you don't just need to look at American cities. Like there's actually amazing things happening in other ecosystems. One of the world leaders in aquaculture right now is Vietnam. Like if you're doing aquaculture, you got to go to Vietnam, full stop. So the point being, like, first I think you want to ask yourself, what do I need to help accelerate or grow my venture? But I got to tell you, I've known a lot of people, because I'm, I know I look like I'm in my 50s, but I'm really 29. Sorry, it was a joke. It's what entrepreneurship does to you. But the point is, it's like you like a lot of people from my vintage and in the 10 years after who they're like, I'm going to the States, and they like New York City for digital media or like SF or whatever, Seattle. I would say probably 95% of those people have moved back. So sometimes I think you ask the question, why do I need to like think about moving there? But I think what you should also do is ask all the people who came back why they came back. That's the other side of the coin, which I think is really important. And you should all spend quality time in other ecosystems. Yes, San Francisco, but also depending on your sector and your problem area, like Singapore, Oslo. Like, I don't know if you guys know, one of the hottest ecosystems right now is Helsinki. Like, they have come back like so strong right now. There's a lot of cool hardware stuff going on there. Like, you would want to spend time there. Get out of this little kind of closet that is Vancouver. Yeah.
Great. I think we got one more question here.
Are we supposed to be the center for digital, right? We have the digital supercluster, don't we? I'm teasing.
Yes.
Given the geopolitical circumstances that we find ourselves in, are there any opportunities or things that have come up that you find exciting that people in hard tech can harness right now, while there's this sort of wave of let's make it in Canada, let's do this in Canada, all of that?
I'm seeing a lot of dual use applications right now. So I think all governments, so Germany announced, I think, $450 billion, which is an insane amount of money. Canada and the new administration is going to be doing not similar amounts, but has similarly, has dedicated amounts towards dual use. And by dual use, I really mean like technology that has a military application, right? And so I'm not necessarily saying bombs and weapons, but mostly on the defense side. So things like drones, cybersecurity, hardening aspects. Like, I think things like quantum will fall into the dual use category as we're thinking about, okay, what are the technologies that Canada can win at, and we will need as a country, not relying on the US. At the same time, I think we're gonna be spending a huge amounts of money, and the commentary is by Canada, right? And so hyperscalers, or what are the Canadian equivalents to hyperscalers that we can leverage to at least offload some of the compute that Canadian technology companies will require to train their models in Canada. Like, how can we ensure that's going to like Canadian technology providers? And so I think like those areas, like particularly from like that have some sort of military application, are areas that like my fund is spending a lot of time on, right? And so thankfully these are lots of sectors that Canada is actually strong in.
Yeah, great question. We're also seeing a lot of like shift. I mean, it takes time, but I mean, conventionally speaking, most Canadian companies, they look at like continental trade, right? It's like, okay, well, the U.S. is right there. They're like very culturally similar. It's very libertarian. I mean, this looks like a great place to set up shop, right? And then insert geopolitical challenges, tariffs, you know, whatever else have you. But there is a shift where companies are now looking more like global, truthfully. Like they're looking at the Indo-Pacific regions. They're seeing Vietnam and Philippines and Singapore as these hubs where there's tons of talent and there's tons of opportunity as well. And they're looking at ways to ultimately directly invest abroad in these new markets, right? Set up a wholly owned subsidiary in a new market, but you still have your head office here in Canada because of the benefits that result from that and the staffing that you have here. A lot of those jobs are primarily IP and engineering, and then you have sales staff in other places to then increase the top line, right? So I think there is a cultural shift in terms of how trade's looked at because of things beyond companies' controls. You can have a really neat idea, really well-funded project, commercialized solution, and it could be making money, and then all of a sudden something happens that's completely outside of your control, which you know you have to be able to mitigate that concentration risk. Yeah.
Yeah, three quick things. So on this dual use, I mentioned open ocean robotics earlier, solar-powered drone boat. Top uses for it right now, illegal fishing monitoring enforcement, right? With the geopolitical winds, some of that is being driven by governments and therefore they need to respond to it. Another one is actually port monitoring. So the number one demand right now by Scandinavian countries around blue economy is actually vessels that will help monitor what's coming into the port, typically underwater, right? Given their proximity to Russia. Right, so very interesting to see that particular piece. So echoing that. Second one is that right now, because of these geopolitical winds, we are seeing a lot of talent and a lot of like even at the university level, a lot of professors who like we're going to go to somewhere and then they're like maybe I'll stay, and that actually is hugely beneficial for us, and I think that's great. And then the final one. Not all of you see this, but we are definitely seeing. We're seeing a lot of global VCs investing in Canadian tech now. So last two deals that we've done, global VCs involved. We co-led a deal with a Singaporean VC. We've worked with Norwegian VCs, UK. And the reason is because they're like, actually, there are great companies in Canada, and maybe we feel a little bit more comfortable about what's happening with those companies here. So that's a talent retention piece, like our company retention benefit for us. Yeah.
Really interesting. I'll just quickly shout out mining tech, which I think we're okay at. Australia might have us beat in some areas, but globally we're great at it. And mining is also an area that I think is underappreciated in terms of how related it's going to be to the energy transition and urbanization and automation, all these things. There are a whole bunch of exponentials that are lining up to make mining tech or mining like either a real problem or maybe not if we can build some technology.
And multi-sector applications for that too, right?
It's a pillar of our fund, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because even take that a step farther, right? It's mining tech, but it's also circular economy tech that actually wraps around that as well. I was speaking to a company earlier that's doing some really cool things here, and so yeah, just a good example of like, yes, the new, but also how we upcycle and do the right things.
100%. I think that there's a huge role mining can play in the circular economy.
Yeah, that's great. We are at time. So, Taylor, do you want to thank our panelists and
maybe
I can do the closing
applause.
slides? Yeah.
Round of applause for our great panelists.
And I don't want to get